know what gets you somewhere? Word of mouth, because that's grassroots. That's how my career was built, man. I didn't have advertising. I get a Grammy, everyone's gonna know it. I work with this artist, everyone's gonna know it. It's all about taking your time and word of mouth, learning to take criticism, and learning your tools. When I was 8 years old, then I saw this equalizer, and I didn't know what it was, but I knew if I moved it up, it had a different characteristic. So I had the low end, the mid, 32 band. So that was my start. It's a business it's not a glamorous business. Do it for the love. You do it because this is what you want to do. And it's a roller coaster ride. It's a big roller coaster ride. And that's the most important thing is you just have to have the love for it. First job after that changed my life. I got a job at Sean Puffy Combs' studio, Daddy's house. The next day they called me and they were like, when can you start?
Hi everybody, we're here today with another one of these IMSTA Meet the Mixing Engineers. And today I have my friend Ariel Borujow. He's meeting with us from New York, and he's been a recording engineer for many, many years, Grammy Award winner, worked on many, many records, many, many styles, and still working today. And I just want to say welcome, Ariel, to the show.
Thank you, Ray.
Thanks for being here, man. How are you?
I'm great, man. I'm chilling. Just got my first dose of the vaccine, so I'm feeling okay.
Excellent. Tell me, is that your home studio? Is this the one that you built?
It is. Yeah, this is my home studio. I'm now started here. When was I in NAMM? 2018. So the week I got back from NAMM was when I did my first project here. So it's been 3 years now.
Wow, so that's a big, big, big move. And how is it? How is it working at home?
It depends. I'm sure with the pandemic, it would be easier than having a 5-year-old running around. But yeah, now that he's back in school and everything's sort of, back to normal on the school front, except for 1 day a week, then it works well for me, man. It's a gift and a curse. Your clients know that you have a studio, so they're expecting everything. So you have to set boundaries. That's the big thing for me. Like, if I don't answer you, don't bother me.
Right. I hear that. I feel that. So tell us a little bit about your backstory, Ariel. How did you get started? Why you're an engineer?
So my engineering experience started when I was 8 years old. I was in music class and I didn't want to sing. I was very shy. And I basically asked my teacher if I could run the stereo system for the music. And she said, sure, because I saw one of those. And Ray, I'm not sure how many people will remember this, but you remember the stackable stereos with the equalizers and the turntable?
Yeah.
So she had one of those, and I saw this equalizer, and I didn't know what it was, but I knew if I moved it up, it had a different characteristic. So I had the low end, the mid, 32 band. So that was my start. Then I discovered a guitar in my grandfather's closet, and I started tinkering with that. And I knew I wanted to do something in music at age 8. And then I saw Jimi Hendrix playing Star Spangled Banner on the Woodstock movie, and I learned how to play the Star Spangled Banner on one string on guitar. The guitar thing didn't work out, although I did play in bands. But the journey really started for me after I got taken off one of the sports teams for reasons I can't talk. And so my dad said, you need to find something to do after school. I walked by the school auditorium and I saw a console and I said, who's doing that? And the guy's like, are you interested? I said, sure, it looks cool. So I went and I did that. And that was the start. Then I discovered a Metallica video that they put out, a movie about the making of the Black Album. And I love I'm a hip hop rock guy. So for me, I'm a Rick Rubin fan. And I pretty much watched them making the album in the studio. And I said, wait, I can do music and nobody needs to know who I am if I stay in that room. I'm like, that's what I want to do. So fast forward, I went to community school to try to get my grades up for 2 years to go to NYU. And I took an AV class. The teacher basically said to me, like, hey, I see you, messing with this console in the back. What do you want to do? I said, I want to work in a studio. And he goes, here's my son's number. Call him. He's an audio engineer. And he'll give you an idea of what to expect. So I called his son, and his son says, listen, you can go to NYU for 4 years. And I'm not discounting education, trust me, because it's far different now. There's like audio programs all over the country. And, you know, back in the day, there was like maybe 5, you know, if you got lucky. And they were lucky to have a state-of-the-art studio. So he basically said to me, you could either go to do this for 2 years, then go to NYU for 3 to 4 years. And then when you get out, you clean toilets. Or you can go to this recording school for 9 months and then clean toilets. And me being the person that I am, I said, let's clean the toilets sooner than later. So I went to the school, to Institute of Audio Research, and that was the start of my career. 2 weeks into school, I started interning at Green Street Recording Studios. And then I was interning for a little while at different studios, Unique. I went through all of them. And my first real job was landed at Bear Tracks Recording Studios in my hometown of Suffern, New York, which was owned by Jay Beckenstein from the band Spyro Gyra, the jazz group. Got a job there. I wasn't good. I got fired. And then the first job after that changed my life. I got a job at Sean Puffy Combs' studio, Daddy's house. The next day they called me and they were like, when can you start? And that, I never looked back after that. And I was an assistant. I went through the ranks. I've worked with most of the big engineers in New York, from Maserati to Charles Alexander, you name them. They're all mentors. And I did that for 5 years.
So tell us some of those early artists you're working with back in there. That must have been amazing for you to be in Puff Daddy's place.
Listen to me. It threw me into the pit. You know, it's like going from it's like going from 0 to 60 very quickly, because I got to see at the time, you know, Puffy was at the top of the charts. Everything was big. This was 6 months after, you know, Biggie passed away. So they were still the biggest thing, you know. And it was an interesting time because everybody used to come in. You didn't know if like Nas would come in, Jay-Z, Derek Jeter. Like, you didn't know who would show up at the studio. It was the who's who, you know. I remember hanging out in the hallway and Jennifer Lopez would come and talk to you, you know, like you were, you know, just like have a conversation. So the good thing, I think what that taught me is I'd become numb to celebrity, you know, like I learned early on that they're just human beings and that you're in their space of their most vulnerable time. That's when they're most vulnerable as artists. So you get to see that, and you get to see the human side. And then I can relate because I'm not much of a technical person. I'm a creative. I'm an artist. When I mix by emotion, not by 2-to-1 ratio compressors, because that's what the guy on YouTube told me to do. You know what I'm saying? Like, I do things the way that I do them to what feels good to me. And I think that early experience dealing with these big people that constantly came around, and, you know, at 22 years old, 21, my name's on all these records as second engineer, assistant engineer. They give me engineer credit, and, you know, and then I moved up and I've worked at different studios. And then after 9/11 was the time that I decided to go freelance because studios were closing, and that was my last straw.
And so now you're at your house. I wanted you to briefly tell me what you got in the home there. What are you using? So what's your DAW? What's your speakers? Tell us a little bit about what you got at home there.
So I have I'm using currently Pro Tools. I've been using Pro Tools since working for Puffy. I think we were the first album in 1998. I think we started working. It was the first album that has gone full Pro Tools, and we were using tape to back up. And I didn't learn Pro Tools like the way the kids did. All of a sudden you showed up and there's like rentals from Dream Hire, and they're like, hey, you got to learn how to do this. And I'm like, what is this? You know what I'm saying? So I've been on Pro Tools since. So I'm on the current version of Pro Tools. So in my room now, I just reset everything up yesterday, but I have an S3 console. I have an Avid dock. My speakers are my long-term ex-girlfriend NS10s. I just can't seem to shake them. I have like 4 pairs of NS10s in this house and 2 Bryston, powered by a Bryston 4BST. I have 2 of them. One is a backup. And then recently, I've been building a relationship with Freddie Knopp of Head Audio. And Freddie and I have become really good friends. And I've turned a lot of people onto speakers. And then a few months ago, Freddie was gracious enough to send me a present. So I'm using the Head Type 20s, which are absolutely stunning. And aside from that, I have an Apollo Universal Audio Apollo 16. The reason I got 16 was because originally I was going to start summing again. I used to sum. Now I've been fully in the box for, I don't know, 8 years now, 9 years. So I use this for my input for my microphone, and then I have a Pro Tools Avid Quartet from Apogee. They're the one that they made for Avid, and I use that as my main converter. I love Apogee. I've always loved Apogee. I used to use the Rosetta 200 when I was summing, and I loved it. I love there's something with the high end and the low end that's really, there's a color to it that's pleasing. And then I have my favorite speaker out of all of them is this, the $200 150 Bose SoundLink that I listen to when I do all my records. True story. And if it sounds good on that and it doesn't break up, it's usually pretty damn good. And it's very simple, man. I have a very simple setup. I use for headphones. I have the headphones that Freddie launched around the time of the pandemic. So I use those a lot. And I look at those like my head monitors, and then these like my NS10s.
Right. So do you use any? Go ahead.
I know what you're going to ask. Yes. SonarWorks.
You use any kind of room correction software?
I've been using SonarWorks since version 1 point something. I've been building a relationship with them for years, and I was part of the team that helped give feedback and knowledge to their most recent version. I think version 4. You could see my name on the credits. I love that company. I'm a huge fan. It's changed my life. I mean, I'm a believer that you have to have, my acoustics are really nice in here. And that helps a lot. So the tweaking that SonarWorks does is pretty much like minimal, but it cleans things up really well. And the headphones they sent me with an individual calibration for these, which is a big deal.
Amazing. Great. We love them too. So tell me, we're going to talk about, the people watching this they make music. Some of them want to be engineers. Some of them are beat makers. Some of them are artists. And I want to talk about how stuff comes to you. And we hear a lot from a lot of mixing engineers, how important it is to organize yourself, label your tracks. How important is that for you as a person that receives all this kind of stuff?
I am extremely OCD. Anyone that knows me knows that if that guitar behind me was pointing the other way, I would stand up right now and move it. Like, I'm very OCD. So I'm telling you this because the importance of prepping puts you into a mind state to attack the mix differently without thinking and being able to be as creative as possible. So what I mean by that is I prep everything. If I get busy, I have an assistant that will help me, but I like color coding. I like folders. I have everything set up and I think ahead. Like, I think of okay, when it's time to print stems, how am I going to put my stems? The other thing that's important before I get into the setting up and the prepping is the communication with the client is more important in the beginning. Because what happens is the more that they see that you're on top of your and prepping and asking questions and dictating how you would want the session, it opens up a sort of dialogue that makes them feel extremely comfortable with you as a mixer, because it shows that you give it about their baby. So you start asking questions, and then, you say to them, okay, for the vocals, like for instance, for me, when I receive vocals, I'll say, I want processed vocals, minus the reverbs. The reverbs, I want you to print separately on returns. And the reason that is because if you send me a reverb into the vocal and I boost mid-range, guess what else is going to get boosted? The reverb. And then it's not the same reverb anymore. So this way I have flexibility to say, you know what, that plate, it's not so, there's a depth I don't like. Let me try the EMT 140 and see how that works out over the, Valhalla or Slate, whatever it is, right? This way I get everything with no plugins. That's the one thing that I want, because the most important thing that you have to realize is we're in a different world now. Everyone has the same tools and they're spending more time on their song than you're going to spend on the mix. So there's a feeling that they have already and an emotion that song, your job is to take it to the next level, not to recreate the wheel. So the communication is key. Then when you communicate, the way that I do it is I have them send me the drums all in one folder, basses all in one folder, and so on and so forth. Lead vocals in one folder, background vocals for the hook in one folder, background vocals for the pre-chorus, blah, blah, blah. The reason we do that is because when I import, the OCD side of me is like, okay, I start with the bass. I want the bass first. So there's all the basses. I do that. I go into the folder, I delete them, and they're already in my Pro Tools, and then drums and all that. Then I like to also strip silence everything, because that's part of it. It helps you understand the song better, right? Because you see the parts more separately. And I usually try to prep everything that I do the next day, the night before, because for me, it's important to wake up and just react rather than be like, oh man, I still got to fix those pops and clicks and all this other stuff in the session. So for me, it's just important to do it the night before. And a lot of big mixers, I've heard interviews with Chris Lord-Alge where he's like, we prep the night before. Like, I just want to walk in and work. Now he's got 2 or 3 assistants, and I'm a one-man team, but I also like prepping. And the reason I like prepping is because I get to learn the parts. I don't have to figure out the parts the next day. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. There's a weird hi-hat pattern here. I got to remember that. And I'll take notes next to me, like, okay, hi-hat and bar, whatever. So for me, it allows me to know the song. And then when I wake up, it's a mind state. And I come in and I just react.
So that prep is very, very important. Do you have your own? So you're going to bring somebody's stuff in, and is it that it's going to fit into your template, or is your template kind of adjust? It's flexible. So how is that balanced?
My template is the only thing that consists on my template is I have a master chain that I go through, that I mix into, minus the limiter. Limiter comes in about 50% in, and effects returns. I'm not one of these guys that has like a standard vocal thing or any of that. The reason is because that's part of my creativity. Like an LA2A may work great on this song, but it's not going to work great. Sometimes it's just a random RVox from Waves that does nothing, but you just pull down the threshold and adjust the gain, So like, you never know. So for me, there are some go-to plugins like the Waves SSL-E I've been using forever. I know the way that pushes. I'm not one of these people that tells you one plugin is better than the other, because I think that's taste anyway. It's like arguing politics and religion. So my thing is that's probably my go-to. I'm a channel strip guy because I was used to working on SSLs back in the day. And reverbs, I just bring in the reverbs, and I use like 3 standard reverbs, 4 delays, and then I have some novelty reverbs on the side that I can make active if I need to. And that's it. Very simple. It's ear and reaction.
Okay. Now let me ask you another question. I've seen some tracks. We interface with some of our customers. We've seen some tracks, sometimes 100 little recordings in there, 40 vocals. Now, when you get a track that just seems to have maybe an excess of tracks, how do you manage that? Because you have to be so careful with people's feelings, and people work in their own way. But how do you, as the person that's receiving it, deal with something that has 40, 50, 60 vocal tracks?
Well, that's a good question. So depending on who the client is, if it's somebody established that knows what they're doing, generally when I hear they're rough, I'll ask them, do me a favor, send me your blend, right? Because I could sometimes make that sound good. Because back in the day when we had 48 tracks to play with, what we would do is we would, as the assistants, I can tell you this because we were doing it. The engineers didn't know how to use, I mean, you know, a lot of the engineers back in the day weren't really hip hop guys. They were using hip hop as a stepping stone to be the next big rock guy. You know, I'm not shouting anyone out on this one, but that was the reality of it. So they didn't take the time to learn MPCs. Whereas me, I was in the studio with Stevie J and Derek Angeletti and these guys, and they would just show me. And I remember Derek Angeletti taught me one time, like, the easiest way to get vocals is the engineer would get a blend on the console, because let's say that there was like 30 tracks of vocals on the chorus. They would get a blend. They would then send it to me, and I would sample it into the MPC. Then I would truncate it from beginning to end on the MP. And then what you used to do is, this was the kicker, you would put it in sequence mode and you would sequence it in the MPC. So then when you connected SMPTE to the SBX 80 box to sync that with the MPC, the engineer hits play, and as soon as the chorus comes, the chorus would play because you put it in song mode on the MPC. And that's the way we did it. So telling you that mind state, sometimes I go back to that. You know what I mean? And if I'm not sure about the client, then what I do is I'll keep everything separate, and then I just group it into buses. You know what I mean? And I'll process. Most of the time with background vocals, I try to compress it as a whole, as a group. So I'll do that on the bus. But if I need to fix individual things, I'll just fix them with an EQ on each individual track. I don't overthink it. But sometimes there is a lot of tracks. I've had, 115 tracks of vocals recently, and it's crazy.
Now, do you do any kind of tuning, Ariel? Are you in the tuning side of things? Or you have an assistant?
I am, if they want to pay extra.
So how do you approach tuning? I mean, when you got that many vocal tracks?
Well, first of all, this is all part of the conversation, right? It has to be a part of the conversation. You're paying me to mix. I'm not cheap, right? So therefore, if you're going to get the most out of me, use me for what you're paying me to do. And I make that very clear. I'll tune your vocals, but you got to pay me, because I'm not going to do that during my mixing, because that'll take me out of my creative space. I don't want that. So I'm very, very, very careful to, like, you have to be careful about it, but you also have to tell the client, listen, if there's any tuning, get it to me before. And I recently had that. I started a project in LA, an EP, and I got the files, and I said, no, you got to do it. I mean, there's between that and when they ask you for side chaining, those are the two things that I require from the client to send me, because I feel like, let's say that I'm using Melodyne, right? And I change the vibrato or something slightly. They'll be able to hear that. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, I change the feel of the record. Like, you do all the production stuff and let me do the fine tuning of the sound. But I will do it. Like, there's some clients that I have a long relationship with that I'm a clown. So I will call them and be like, you suck. You missed like a note on the chorus. I'm going to have to tune it. You know what I mean? So I'll go in and tune it like easy, but very rare do I do that. But if I feel like something is off, I'll communicate with them first. Like if I say, hey, this might be off. And if it's something simple, I'll attack it. But usually what happens is they'll hear that, then they hear something else, then they hear something else. And they're like, you know what? Let me work on it and I'll send it back to you. And I'm like, all right, cool.
Okay, so getting back to this, what you receive as a mix, and what we're trying to do is help people prepare their stuff better for you guys so they get a better result. Now, one of the things that you see a lot as well, people are using a lot of samples. These samples are stereo. Let me ask you as an engineer, any reason to have a kick, a snare, hi-hat in stereo as a sample?
If it comes, well, it depends, right? If they have a little reverb on it, yes, you want to keep it, Like if you have I have a ton of one hits samples that I own that have a little reverb. There's a dry and there's a wet. My opinion is, however it was, send it to me in that same way. And then I'll make the decision whether it should stay stereo or mono. Generally, these days, I leave everything how it's given to me.
Now, one more question. And again, this is another problem you see a lot popping up with the music samples, the ones that have, more than one thing inside. They're important to the song. They're important to the beat. But how do you manage with all the energy in the low end that's rumbling and moving around the stereo field? How do you approach that as a mixer? Because that could affect, your bottom end, right?
Yeah, what I do is the way that I mix generally is, I come from New York, so we like low end. And, a lot of it, now that people are starting to use headphones more, we had no choice. We're on subways, you know what I'm saying? Like you needed headphones. So we were always mixing for headphones. But what I do is to me, the most important things are the low end and the vocal, right? That to me is like the most important. So what I do is I usually start with the bass and the kick first, and then I bring in all the drums and I try to get a groove and I try to work on the low end, because what happens is in digital, now it's less important because of the 64-bit technology, but you still got to have some sort of gain structure because plugins react differently, correct? So what I generally like to do is focus with the kick and the bass, 808s, whatever's in there, because that's going to have more information than anything. So what I do is I try to set that and peak at around -10, -12, something like that, because then it gives me like another, I don't know how much dB of room to add like everything in. So I'll start with the bass, the drums, then the vocal right away. And when I say I put the vocal in, I'm putting reverb, whatever. I'm creating that emotion right away with the vocal. And then I find the main instrument, whatever that is, piano, guitar, synth, whatever it is, and I put that in the vocal, under the vocal. And then I start it's a process of elimination. Which one is what's next in line as importance? And then I start, and it's like, it starts here and it all trickles down, and all the other stuff you're just kind of blending around it. But I think that helps you get the low end correctly in the beginning, because most of it is headroom. You know what I mean? If you turn up an 808 too much and you're peaking at -6 and now you start putting everything else in, dude, you're going to end up in the red before you know it. And then there's a lot of maintaining, like a lot of high pass filtering where a lot of things don't need that low end, but some people go in, too much. So their mixes sound things. So for instance, if you send me a sample pack, I assume that sample's probably mixed. It's not like back in the day when we had to pull samples and drums from records and clean them up. You know what I mean? These are fucking sample packs that people are EQing and doing everything already. So, you have to be cognizant of that and make wise decisions and not overdo it. Because I tell people, the older I got, and I say this all the time, in the beginning I learned what to do, and the older you get, you learn what not to do. So my mixing has actually become easier because I'm just doing basics. Gain structure, reductive EQ, little saturation, and that's it. And panning is so huge. But I do want to add something to this topic. One of the biggest mistakes that I'm seeing with a lot of up and coming producers and artists, I will get things that they put a stereo widener across everything. And what happens is their mix sounds this big. And then the first thing I do is I go into my dangerous monitor and I hit mono. And then all of a sudden, everything's gone. And what happens is, what people don't understand is, to sound bigger doesn't necessarily have to be wider. Because as you bring things in closer, the frequency spectrum becomes fuller this way. If you push things out too far, you're going to hear more on each side, but this whole middle piece is kind of empty. So you have to start playing with the entire frequency, the panning, everything with panning. The whole stereo field has to be played with, and that's such a misconception. Everybody makes everything wide and wide and wide, and like you need to check that. Like you don't have to put a widener on everything, because I'll send a client back, be like, dude, how did those synths sound so big right now? And I'm like, well, you had them widened to 100 and 100. They're now at 60 and 60. Literally, that's what I tell them. And they're like, you know, and then they see it and they're like, whoa, that's so like, that makes sense. And I'm like, yeah, totally. That's all you needed to do. So that's a biggie for me.
That's awesome. Now, do you advise, like, you know, a lot of people record stuff, they're recording vocals, they're recording instruments. Maybe they don't use all the headroom that the DAW allows. You advise normalizing your tracks before you send them to you?
Absolutely not. I think that's the worst. So I always tell people, get it off normalizing, because what starts happening is you start getting bricks and bricks and bricks instead of having that nice dynamic thing. So I always tell them off for sure.
Great advice. All right, let's talk about some specific parts of your mixing. I want you to explain sort of the Ariel ambient system. Like, how do you deal with reverb? Just that one most important thing that you're gonna put on vocals, you're gonna put on the snare, you put on instruments. What's your kind of method? What's your philosophy?
It's great. I look at reverb as color, right? So let's say that my three reverbs are an EMT 250, a wood room, which has bright characteristics because it's a wood room, and then a short, and then a cathedral, which is a little long, right? The first thing that I do is I coined this phrase: you solo to fix, not to mix, right? So what I say is that as you're listening to the record, right, unsoloed, sometimes you can use reverb for color. Like I want a little bit more top in the vocal to poke out, but it'll create depth. So I'll add the wood room in there, right? If I want to push it back, I'll use the cathedral, slowly sneak it in there. So I use reverbs for color, but I also use it obviously for the front to back and the depth, right? So for me, it's like, don't overdo it with reverbs. I think that if you, some records call for you to hear the reverb, right? Like to hear it. But what happens is sometimes you start hearing that high end on the reverb, the tail, and sometimes it just sounds fake. So my method is if you can hear the reverb, bring it down, because that means that you're a little too much. But as you're adding reverb to all the other elements, it starts working itself out. So it sounds like one cohesive song. So, but again, for me, reverb is depth. But the thing that I try to teach, you know, because I have a mentoring program that I have students online, and I always tell them, like, they'll see me do something and I'll be like, push the vocal louder, and they take in the fader and move it up. And I'm like, no, undo that. Put the 250 on there now and slowly bring it up. What is that doing? And then all of a sudden they're like, yo, it sounds big. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't hear the reverb. So those are the things that I try to explain to people with reverb. Don't overthink it with reverb, and you don't need 1,000 different reverbs on your session, you know, like try to keep it concise and short, because what you're doing is you're mixing the song through these particular reverbs to create a space so the song lives in one place.
Right. Delay. Now, delay, you know, for people, this is something that's used just as much as reverb.
Oh, yeah.
So what's your kind of method of timing it? How does it relate to the beat of the song? I mean, how does it not relate to the beat of the song? How do you spread it? What's the kind of Ariel approach to that?
So it depends on the song, obviously. Like my go-to is the Echo Boy. I'm a huge fan of Sound Toys, and shout out to them because they're family. But so one of the things that I do is that the Echo Boy for me is the most powerful delay, because what you can do with Echo Boy when you get under the hood, there's no other delay that can do what it does. You know, Ken meticulously like created that with as it's deep. So what I do is, if you go under the hood on the Echo Boy, you have the width knob on there, right? And then you could also change the delay, you know, from 0 to, I think it's 20, don't quote me, 2.5 or 25 milliseconds. I'm not looking at it. I know it's one of them. But what happens is you could give it a little, you could give the width a little delay so it sounds like it's a little bit wider. Then you have an EQ on there, and then you can add reverb to it. So generally what I like to do is in the verses, the delays, I try to narrow them a little bit because I like to create that perception with the chorus that when it comes in, it explodes wider. But the delays, there's no rhyme and reason. Generally what I like to do is get the high end off of it, because there's so much high end in pop records. And when I say pop, I'm talking about everything under the sun, popular music, right? Whether it be hip hop, rock, whatever. So I try to keep all my delays with not a lot of top end to it. And depending on what I need it for, like sometimes I don't, you know, I might use it just to make things wider, you know, instead of using like a reverb, I'll put a delay on there. And also guitars, I use it on a lot. I also have dotted eighth note delay that might sound a little off, but I've been using it a lot on some rock records. And really my theory is sometimes if you can, like if it's a song, right? And the singer's singing, sometimes it's better to have it tucked and not fully heard because something's going on that the brain is perceiving, that something's going on. It sounds cool, but you don't really know what's happening. You don't know if it's coming from the reverb, but it's actually the delay. And then obviously when we get into the choruses, I might go a little nuts. And again, this is dependent on the song. Sometimes I don't use delays at all, believe it or not. But delays, again, it's almost has the same theory I said with reverbs. Like sometimes, unless it's a delay throw and it's intentional, sometimes they're better felt than heard.
Now, do you treat the delay on the background vocals different from the lead? I'm sure you do, but how do you deal with that? Do you have a rule?
It all depends. Like maybe the width of it, I do. But there's no, because a delay's a delay, you know. But again, it depends. Like, let's say that on the verse, it's a bit of a darker delay. So maybe one of the exceptions would be on the chorus, since there's more going on and there's synthesis. Let's assume it's like a pop EDM record and there's synthesizers in like the 5 to 10K frequency range. You know, that's masking a lot, then I might need to pop the delay out. So I'll either boost some mid-range on it or some high end, depending on where I'm sitting, and then I'll start playing with the width of the delays just to make them sit. Because what people don't understand is how much panning has more to do with everything in the mix. Like I can literally just start with volume and panning and get a mix like feeling okay until you dig in under the hood. So yes, there's a difference, but again, it depends on the song. Sometimes there's a song I'm working on now isn't that different. The chorus actually has no drums and it's just a singing and a guitar. So I don't need to make the delay brighter, and I ended up using the same delays I did in the verses. So it's just making an educated guess on what you're, you know, or feeling.
Right. Now, the traditional thing for background vocals, I guess, to spread them wide, the lead right down the middle. Anything else you want to add to that? Is there another sort of secret?
Yeah, the waves doubler. Waves doubler. A little bit of that comes from like the bad boy era of using the H3000. If you listen to a lot of those, you know, late 90s, early 2000 hip hop records, like you can hear like that dual pitch H3000 preset.
Eventide.
Yeah, everybody was using that. So I come from that. Sometimes lately I'm not really adding much to spread them out because I feel like you can get a lot of it done with panning. And if I need to spread things out, I'll do it more on the master, and I'll do like, let's say I'm using, I don't know, the BX V3 EQ, the mid-side EQ. I may add that to, like, I'll put the stereo width to maybe like 103 to 107. Nothing crazy, you know? Because at the end of the day, it's not about this. It's about filling in everything. So if you have everything filled in, you can play more with the sides with EQ and delays and things to make it feel wider than just putting, because what happens is if you start putting these wideners on shit, then you're going to start running into phasing issues. And that's what I get all the time. And that goes back to that everyone uses wideners because they think their mix sounds bigger, but in reality it sounds thinner.
Okay. Compression, we can't skip compression. What's your kind of, advice for people with compression?
Listen to your vocal, right? Listen to your vocal. I tell people, start with a very slow attack and a fast release and start from there. Because what happens is you can, like, let's take a 1176, which you can control the attack and the release and the input and the output, right? What I like to do is look at the needle moving. I'm not anymore really, but if I were to explain it to somebody, if it's a rapper, right? An MC's rapping, they're attacking it. It's very, very percussive, right? Then you take, I don't know, Beyonce, for instance, and she's singing, right? So now you have to play a little bit more with the attack and the release, right? So the release you start playing with because she's holding out a note and it slowly comes back, and then she might hit it a little bit here and there. So for me, compression, I always tell people, try to use less of it unless you're going for some sort of sound. Like if someone says to me, I want a radio effect, I'll throw it through an 1176. I'll press all the buttons in and I'll crush it and put it right in your face. But I tell people, start really light with compression, because to me, and this is just my opinion, because all of this is opinion, right? I feel like hardware compressors sound much different than software compressors. I feel like hardware compression can be more forgiving, and software, and it's not knocking software compression because I only use software compression, but it's a matter of like trying to use less of it to get your point across. So I like to do things in stages, you know what I mean? Like I'd rather do less. Like my master bus compressor is like barely hitting 1 when I'm compressing. Barely, maybe 2 tops, never beyond that. I don't come close to 3 or 4. So for me, it's light compression. Be very, very light-handed, especially when you're not experienced enough to really understand it. And really, you just got to look at compressor like taming the dynamic range, right? So if a singer's talking and all of a sudden I get loud, like you want to tame that loudness. So you got to listen to those, and people don't listen. They just set their things up, their parameters, and they set it and forget it, and they don't really understand. Sometimes I go in and automate during certain parts, the attack and release or the threshold. So there's that, and you dig so deep into it.
Now, do you use much modulation effects, chorus, phasing, that kind of stuff?
I do. I actually use the Dimension D a lot on basses. I've been used to it as an assistant. I remember there was a producer named John Alasia, who I've assisted for, who's worked with like John Mayer and Mraz and all these people, and he used to use it on the bass, and I just picked up the habit, and I was like, oh, this sounds kind of dope. And people are like, what'd you do to the bass? I'm like, it's just a little chorusing effect. I'll use that on like keys a lot, like Rhodes. I love the the Mxr Flanger from UAD is a classic. I love that one so much. So I definitely dabble with them depending on it. But very little. Or the Meta Flanger from Waves is another oldie but a goodie, you know? But I'm all about it. I like to make things interesting. I like for people to listen and be like, what did you do there, you know?
What about any kind of saturation or distortion?
All my mixes are saturation. That's part of my sound. I use the capitator, the radiator on clean setting, like a synthesizer. I think the radiator is super dope. Sometimes you don't even need an EQ. You have a low and a high frequency curve on there. You just do that and you're good to go. It's got character. I love the VSM3 plugin on the master in mid-side mode. I use that sometimes, especially with live music, because it glues things together, especially when the band is if I'm working on a band and they're playing in the same room. What else is a good saturator that I use? Decapitator's Top Devil Lock I use a lot if I want more mid-range out of the vocal. I will set that to a fast release, because what people don't know is that knob in the middle, slow release and slow and fast release. So I usually set it to fast, and if I want to add a little bit of mid-range, I'll add a little bit of the crush. And then a lot of my saturation, my trick is it's all parallel. I don't do full. What I do is I try to create a sound where I'm adding other harmonics to the sound in parallel mode, and that's been my sound for a few years now. I think it's important.
Now that's an interesting segue, because now we got to talk about how you arrange your effects. So what kind of effects would you run like in an insert? Which ones would you run on like a subgroup? Which ones would you run on a master bus? And what's the kind of Ariel approach to that?
So let's take vocals, right? Let's say I have a gang of vocals. So again, if I need to fix anything, I will get my balance with the panning and everything right from the beginning. And then what I do is, once I have that blend and I need to fix any frequencies within like the sound of each individual vocal, then I send them all to a bus. And in the bus, what I generally do is I'll do, like, depending on how much I cleaned up in the beginning on the individuals, I'll usually put like a Fab Filter Q3, and I'll fix whatever I need to. Sometimes lately I've been using a lot of dynamic EQ on it. It's pretty special. Then after that, I'll put a compressor. Then or a de-esser. It depends. Usually the de-essing I try to do individually. That's another thing. Unless it's not that much, then I'll do a de-esser on the overall. Then I'll put, after let's say the de-esser first, let's say the vocals were a little essy, I'll put a compressor to tame that. Then I'll put a broadband EQ, which is usually my SSL, and I'll freak it with that a little bit. And then sometimes I might do something out of novelty, like I'll put like a decapitator, or sometimes, a lot of the time, the A800 from UAD. I love that plugin because I knew how to align those tape machines, so I know how to freak them a little bit. So that's really it. I try to keep it super minimal, man, because at the end of the day, if something is like, you need to put that much work, it might be the wrong thing. But unless you're creating a sound. And then the other thing, my touch up, and this is like a big secret, and this is one of my favorite companies, and you'll know this, Ray, is Sonable. Because Sonable, that smart EQ is what I do, and the way that I use it. And here's like, this is going to be the best trick for people. So what I do is, I love AI, right? My mastering engineer is a computer scientist, and he studied AI, and it's fascinating. So what I like to do is I like to hit the record on, I put that last. Let's say that vocal sounds great, right? But now I just want the vocal to lift a little bit, right? And remember what I was saying about parallel processing, right? So what I end up doing is I'll add that, I'll let it do its thing. And the way that the Sonable works, the Smart EQ, is it starts off, it automatically hits you at 75%, right? The curve. So you hear it and it sounds really muddy like this when it first happens. And you're like, is this what it's supposed to sound like? What I do is I drop that percentage, the wet dry, to 0. And then I slowly creep it up until I feel like the vocal sort of just jumps at you a little bit. And that's how I use it. No, I don't think I've spoken to Alex, the owner. We talk like, occasionally he hits me up. And when I told him how I use it, he was like, very interesting, because I don't think, but it does work, and it's part of my trick.
That's interesting, because I don't know a lot of people that have actually got onto that kind of stuff yet, Ariel. So you're blazing a trail there.
I know.
And that's an interesting use. I have to remember that. We're actually going to interview Alex as part of the series of Meet the Programmers.
Good, you can tell him.
That'll be an interesting thing.
He's the man. He's so smart, man.
Yeah, he is. Now, but you didn't tell us what do you leave for the master bus?
I can't tell you everything because so what happened was there's this one of my boys is a multi-billion streaming engineer, Cohen Heldings. He's done some big hip hop stuff, and Cohen and I have been working on a master chain like you wouldn't believe. So I will tell you a few things, but I can't tell you everything. So one of the things is first thing on the chain is the Ssl Compressor from Waves. There's a lot of good ones. I sometimes interchange them with the Townhouse one from Plugin Alliance, and also the G-Bus compressor from UAD. But Waves is usually my go-to one. If I feel like there's too much low end and I need to sort of take out some of the low end, I'll slap the UAD on there, because if I want the low end to come out more, I'll use it because it's got that sidechain filter where you could bring in some of the low end. But rarely. It's usually the SSL from Waves, and it barely hits it. Ozone 9 in a very specific way, that's set it and forget it. There's an EQ curve on there. There's a limiter on there. And then after that is the Fab Filter L2 limiter. And usually that's usually set to either transparency or dynamic.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of their hottest products.
I love it.
When you're mixing, do you feel it's important to leave a little bit of headroom, a little bit of something for the mastering guy? That's
an awesome question. So back in the day, I'm spoiled. My mastering engineer is one of my best friends, and when we had our studio in Manhattan, he was down the hall, so I would literally go and sit. Every time he mastered, I would learn, and I would go back and be like, wait a second, I wonder if I made this brighter. So one day I sat Rick down. I said, yo, how do you want this? Do I leave you room? And he's like, bro, mix it like it's finished. And that doesn't mean volume. I do like to leave headroom. So I usually leave him about 3 dB. So what I do is, Rick also used to be a very heavy analog guy. He comes from he was Herb Power's assistant at the Hit Factory, and he came up under Herb. And he was an analog guy, and Rick went fully in the box, especially when he started studying computer science. So what happened at Columbia, so he's a smarty pants. And just got his degree last week at the age of 44, or 2 weeks ago.
Amazing.
So, yeah, amazing. Right? From mastering to that.
Amazing.
So he basically, what we've been doing lately is I bought the Fab Filter stuff because he uses the limiter as his final piece. So what I did is cheating. He gave me a starting point, and then I mix it. So then what I do is I set him whatever I tweak, I set him I send him the file for that, and he could start it. But usually I'll print without it. I'll always print one version with and one without, so he can see what the client's been hearing. But it's been working out. So I definitely have been, when it comes to frequencies and overall balance, I try to get it to a point that my goal is for him to do to my mix, maybe 0.2 dip here, maybe 0.3 boost here at 2.8, whatever. That's my goal. I always call him what did you do? What did you do to this? You know what I'm saying? And he always seems to do something that blows my mind. He's like, I didn't do too much, and then I'm like, but it sounds so awesome. He's like, yeah, once I notched that frequency out, everything else lifted. And I'm like, you're fucking genius. This is why I can't do this. You know what I mean? I can't be a mastering engineer.
Mm-hmm. Now, so what about loudness? We have this loudness situation with Spotify being this level, Apple Music this level, YouTube another level, and people are hearing the stuff out of earbuds. How does that impact the way you mix, the way you guys prepare your music? Do you have to prepare many versions? Do you mix to a standard? How do you
think about it.
do
I don't
do?
have to do anything if I'm not mastering it, right? So what I do on the mixing end, people are going to die. Like, I read an article on Gear Sluts that my favorite mixer is Ssl Engineer. Like, that's the reason I went in the box, him and Chad Blake, right? Like, I look up to those two guys. Like, their mixes are just like, I don't think anyone with a console comes close to those two guys. And Serban's right-hand guy, John, was saying that they hit -6 LUFS when they send it to clients, and it still has dynamics. And that's what I've been doing. So I'm cheating. Because if it's loud, the client will know. But if it's loud and still retains dynamics, you win. Because it doesn't sound crushed. You wouldn't know unless you put it up to a meter that it's -6 LUFS. You wouldn't know. You'd listen and be like, yo, this sounds dope. And then I'd be like, yo, look how loud it is. And you'd be like, because the loudness was always perceived because shit was like brick walled. I'm not giving you brick wall. Like put it this way, the way my master chain works, my L2 limiter is maybe limiting between 0.5 to 1 dB of reduction. So that tells you where the dynamic is. And then I let Ricardo or Joe Laporta, whoever touches it after, to handle whatever needs to be handled on the, on that end.
Now, Ariel, you started way back, man. You started back in the MP days, and you watched the business change so much.
Oh yeah.
And you see what we got now, 2021. You see the tools we got. We got AI. We got amazing DAWs. All the DAWs are good. Almost all the plugins are good. I mean, give people watching this a sense of how lucky they are to be doing music and production now.
Okay, so I'll put into perspective. When I started producing, I needed $1,260. I remember this price. Why? Because I needed an MPC. So I went out and bought an MPC 2000, and that came standard with 8 megs of RAM. Right? So 8 megs of RAM would give you 5 seconds of sampling time. I needed more than that. So I doubled it. Right? And that's how I did it. And then you learned. And then you had to find a studio because you had to get a Mackie mixer, and you had to get the 8 outputs so you could do the, you know what I'm saying? Or you have to multi-track it in the studio. Now, literally, we all have the same tools. Like, people like, yo, what did you use on the vocal? And I'm like, I don't know, SSL and the RVox. And they're like, no way, dude. And I'm like, what do you mean no way? Like, it's just an EQ and a compressor. Like, what do you think, that there's gold in there? Like, it's not. It's the ear, not the gear, right? Like, it means nothing. So I tell people all the time now, man, you are lucky. My 5-year-old has a sequencing program on his iPad that school provided. This kid is already making beats at 5. So, like, put that into perspective of where we were. My first sequencer, and I just heard someone talk about it on who was it on a podcast? It must have been on the Working Class Audio, I think it was. I think my boy Steve Dent, who used to be who used to work for Puff also, he said Digital Orchestrator Pro from a company called Voyager was my first sequencer and his. And that shit was terrible. It was like $100 or not even. My parents got it for me for like my birthday. And you had to have a computer, but the computers then, were not that great. So, like, it was Dell or something like that. So the kids now have you literally, if your parents have a Mac, you good. Like, you just get Logic or GarageBand and you can kill it. You know what I mean? Like, you can make full beats. So they're very lucky. Like, technology is caught up, and we're all on the same page. That's why people don't understand, like, it's the ear, not the gear. It's like, if let's say if I'm in the same room with Slash, and Slash hands me his Les Paul and I play it, Am I going to be better than Slash because I played the same guitar? Am I going to be close to him? No, I don't have the skill like Slash. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing with audio. Like everyone's so concerned. I got to get this plugin. I got to get this plugin. I got to get this plugin. I'm like, man, you need maybe 5 plugins. That's it.
So you make a great point, and this is the reason we're doing this is to help people, get where they need to go. So here's the real question. I want to give you to give advice to people who are watching. Since we all have pretty much access to the same things, what do you think is that X factor? How do you that person watching you right now, how do they get one step ahead? How do they move to the next level? What do they do to get better, to make recognized, to become successful in the audio business? What are the kind of advice, or what are the kind of qualities, or what would you say are the few things that you can do?
I'm going to tell you the first thing, and the most important, that people are lacking now: learning to take criticism. Right? I remember being in a room with like Tony and Charles. Charles was a big mentor to me, right? Like Charles said to me once, "Don't worry about what I do here. Watch how I deal with Puffy when he's listening to the mix and he gives me some sort of feedback. This stuff you could learn, but what you need to learn is how to deal with the client," right? That's the most important thing. And because studios are not where they were, and people are just sending things over the internet, and then the client, you get an email that you read wrong that seems like your mix was ripped to shreds, and really it was just like, if you analyze it, all you needed to do was turn the vocals up 0.5 dB. You know what I mean? Like that, learning to take criticism is important, because the way that you react to it is going to determine whether your client's coming back to you or not. Right? And we live in an era now where everyone wants to be like put on a pedestal, and nobody's wrong. And that's terrible. So that's first, is learn to take criticism. You have 2 ears, 1 mouth. You should listen twice as much as you talk. I say that all the time, man. That's the real, right? The other thing is don't be so concerned about time, right? Like, I'll put it into perspective. I started interning when I was 19. I am 44 years old now, right? I have never not been in a recording studio. I could walk into any studio in the world. Like, where's the patch bay? That's the gear. Cool. I'm good. I was in France. We talked about this. The assistant left, and I had to figure out the room, and it wasn't a small room. It was a 10,000 square foot facility, like just one room. So like, the point is like, take your time. I didn't start making a living. Like, I'm talking about like not struggling to pay my bills until I was like in my early 30s, right? And even then I was just like, okay, right? But that's the most important, is everyone's looking at other people and being like, well, he made it at age 21 and he made it at this. Man, stop looking at that. Everyone's journey's different. The grass is always greener on the other side, right? That's second. Third is you got to be a people person, right? And you also have to, and the other side of being a people person is giving people, like, if you want to become an engineer, like, I don't believe in advertisements. Great. But you know what gets you somewhere? Word of mouth, because that's grassroots. That's when somebody's word is given to someone else that you're at what you do, and now they want to work with you. That's how my career was built, man. I didn't have advertisement. You know what I mean? Like, I did everything. You give me one credit, I'm going to milk it. I get nominated for a Grammy, everybody's going to know it. I get a Grammy, everyone's going to know it. I work with this artist, everyone's going to know it, right? That's the way you promote it, right? But the thing is that it's all about like taking your time and word of mouth, learning to take criticism, and learning your tools, like really understand it. So I would rather have someone that knows one EQ, like an SSL channel strip, than having somebody who has 1,000. You know what I mean? Plugins, and they don't know what they're doing. If that makes sense.
Very good advice. Now you talk about the Grammy, man. Man, I know you might have to get up, but can you show it to them, man? Can you show us your Grammy?
You know what? I can't say too much because the Grammys are very secretive about it.
So can you show us the top?
I'll put the top
of it. Come on, man.
And there goes everything.
All right.
So it's a joke because I was nominated. I've been on albums that were nominated a lot, and
but what did that mean for your? What did that mean to you? What did it mean to your career? What
Can I tell you something? I didn't even know I won it. I got an email, and I had to call Destin Bennett at the time when he was working for the Grammys, who's like one of my good friends. And I was like, yo, D, I'm like, is this legit? Did I win a Grammy? And he was like, yeah. How did they not tell you? You know, and then I still didn't believe it. And then like 2 weeks later, my wife's like, a package came in the mail. It's pretty heavy. I'm like, could you open it for me? And I got it. And I was like, holy crap, like that's real. But it was a joke because I have nominations and stuff all over. But like, you know, it became like almost like, okay, cool. You got nominated. That's cool. You know, like I don't look at the Grammys as much because like I do look, I mean, I'm part of the Recording Academy, but like I don't feel like that defines me or anybody because there's so many good engineers out there. There's so many good mixers that haven't had the opportunity to be put in that world yet. You know what I mean? Yes. Do your stock go up a little bit? Sure it does. You know what I mean? But that's it. Like your stock goes up, like, but you still have to do the work. That doesn't mean anything. You know what I mean? It's a constant struggle. And the other advice I would give people is when you make money in this business, pretend like you're poor. Act like you're poor. Seriously, because you could make 20 grand 1 week and then you don't work for 2 weeks. Then you could make 5 grand 1 week and then you don't work for a few days. So the way that you have to balance your money is I'm frugal. I don't care, you know? So I just learned like that because I didn't have money growing up. We were poor, you know? So like I don't know any different. You know, my brother teases me. I drive 2 used cars, man. Like, I don't really care. He's like, why don't you get a car? And I'm like, well, why? There's a difference. I own this one. Why am I going to spend $500 a month for when that can go into my son's college? Or like, how do you see that? You know?
Well, you're like me. You're like me. I like that.
Yeah. What does
I'm
it matter,
like
man? I'm not trying to impress nobody. Like, it was so funny. I had a meeting in the city one day. I showed up. I'm proud of it, man. I bought a 2001 Camry mint condition from my dead neighbor. I know that sounds morbid, but she passed away and her daughter sold it to us. It had 24,000 miles. And I'm thinking to myself,
oh my God.
Wait a second. A Camry with 24,000 miles? It's not the nicest car, but you know what? When I'm driving in the city, I don't have collision on it. I could care less.
It's perfect and indestructible. So that's great.
Yeah. And that's what I tell people all the time, man. When I see like engineers and stuff with like Rolexes, I'm like, come on, man. I'm like, please, you know, like you look at a guy like Duro, who's one of my friends, and like Duro's arguably the most successful mix engineer in hip hop of all time. And you'd never know. You see this guy with like, you know, a hoodie and sweatpants and whatever, and doesn't even, you know, he has an iWatch, you know, like he ain't getting fancy, you know. So that's how I learned. And I think that it's a business it's not a glamorous business. You know, you do it for the love. You do it because this is what you want to do. And it's a roller coaster ride. It's a big roller coaster ride, you know, and that's the most important thing is this. You just have to have the love for it, and you have to be smart and take criticism and not overspend your money just because you made a little bit of change 1 week, you know?
Excellent, man. Well, this is such a great time sitting and talking with you. I'm going to shout out right now to my man, Destin, because he's the one that introduced us years and years ago.
Yeah, man.
I want to thank you again on behalf of IMSTA, not just for this talk, but I don't know if you remember, you did a keynote for us in New York.
I sure did. I remember that real well.
Yeah, so you've been so open and willing to share and give us so much information
And I've
and
done
give these kids
panels too.
advice.
I've done
Yeah, you've
panels
done
for you guys
panels
too.
actually
That's right.
before and
Yeah,
after.
that's right.
So I thank you again, man. You're a very generous man. I consider
My
you a
pleasure.
friend. And
Likewise, bud.
you know, have a good day, man. Anything else you want to say? Any last words?
I know this sounds cliche, but just don't give up. This business will eat you alive. There's times that you're going to feel like you want to get out and that you can't continue. And I've had a lot of pep talks with my former assistants. A lot of them, they're probably going to watch this and laugh. But like, for all the hard times that you go through, there's a lot of positive too. And you're working in music, like you're working in, like, music brings joy to people. It's like the one thing that's not like, it's joy. It's pure joy. You know what I mean? And I think that's important for people to understand, that we're all lucky to be doing what we do.
All right, brother. Thank you so much, man.
My man.